Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ClearCut. I'm Michelle Makori. The Trump administration has made a major move to reverse an Obama administration policy that had broadly changed the U.S. outlook on Israeli settlements on the west bank of the Jordan River. Speaking at the State Department earlier today, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the United States does not consider those settlements to be inherently against international law. And perhaps more importantly, Pompeo clarified that this move is simply a return to what was U.S. policy set by President Ronald Reagan that stood for 35 years. That is, before a last-minute change put in place by the Obama administration in 2016.
The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. U.S. public statements on settlement activities in the West Bank have been inconsistent over decades. In 1978, the Carter administration categorically concluded that Israel's establishment of civilian settlements was inconsistent with international law. However, in 1981, President Reagan disagreed with that conclusion and stated that he didn't believe that the settlements were inherently illegal. Subsequent administrations recognized that unrestrained settlement activity could be an obstacle to peace. But they wisely and prudently recognized that dwelling on legal positions didn't advance peace. However, in December 2016, at the very end of the previous administration, Secretary Kerry changed decades of this careful bipartisan approach by publicly reaffirming the supposed illegality of settlements. After carefully studying all sides of the legal debate, this administration agrees with President Reagan. The establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the West Bank is not, per se, inconsistent with international law.
All right, let's clarify what happened in December 2016. Then President Barack Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry went against the Trump transition team's express wishes. In the waning days of its term, the Obama administration allowed the passage of UN Security Council Resolution 2334 that slammed the settlements and labeled them a, quote, flagrant violation under international law. Now, by abstaining instead of vetoing the resolution, as the United States had reliably done to similar measures for decades, the Obama administration allowed the highly symbolic measure to make it through the chamber. Because of that, it was the first time in nearly 40 years that the Security Council passed a resolution critical of Israeli settlements. Now, Secretary Pompeo stressed that his move essentially recognizes the reality on the ground, which can ultimately help peace prospects.
We believe that what we've done today is we've recognized the reality on the ground. We've now declared that settlements are not per se illegal under international law, and we have provided the very space that your question suggests, the very space for Israel and the Palestinians to come together to find a political solution to this very, very vexing problem. We think, in fact, we've increased the likelihood that the vision for peace that this administration has, we think we've created space for that to be successful. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move forward on that before too terribly long.
All right, not surprisingly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is praising this move, saying that this now rights the wrongs of the Obama administration's reversal in policy. Also, not surprisingly, Palestinian leaders are denouncing Pompeo's statement, calling it, amongst other things, dangerous. Let's talk more about these major developments with our opening panel. Joining us now is Matt Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and Shai, Middle East Analyst and Partner at Gotham Government Relations. All right, Shai, let's start with you. What is the significance of this move?
I think there's two elements. One is that I challenge anyone to explain to me how this is the prelude, the final piece before issuing some big Middle East peace proposal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think this basically takes that off the table once and for all. The other is that it really is firing a shot across the bow of the Democrats by suggesting that somehow the Obama administration had this big change in policy, when in fact, even under President Reagan, whatever he might have said, the policy of the State Department was consistently, from 1978 until today, that the settlements are not consistent with international law. So I think those are the two things. This was not based on some some significant legal research and consultation. We would have heard about it beforehand.
Shai,
It was
the Trump administration, on the contrary, Pompeo said that the Trump administration's legal team had been looking into this extensively, that this was seen as a slight to the Trump administration, which urged the Obama administration not to make that move at the UN Security Council in December 2016.
I guarantee you, there was no legal team that was looking at this with any serious consideration.
You base this assessment on what?
We would have heard something.
Is this conjecture? You don't know definitively. So you're saying the Secretary of State is lying when he said there was a legal team looking at this?
I'm sure they had some lawyers inside the administration, but they did not have the legal experts. The 1978 decision was announced by the legal advisor to the State Department, not by the Secretary of State.
Well,
so
the Trump administration, okay, look, Shai, legally, a lot of legal scholars agree with the Trump administration that it's not inherently a violation of international law. And that is the point that's been trying to be made here by the administration, that there shouldn't be a preset determination, that this should still be subject to interpretation, and it's trying to shift the narrative that this has already been established.
It's a minority point of view in the international legal community, like saying that climate change isn't real. But they can say it, that's fine. Israel should hold on to the territories, let's say, fine. But consistent with international law, it's very hard to say that that's a consensus opinion in the international legal community or anything close to it.
All right, but Shai, there's been a lot of issues that the international legal community hasn't necessarily been aligned with the United States or Israel. It doesn't necessarily make them right. And it doesn't necessarily mean, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it helps or hurts the chances of peace, which you clearly think it only serves to damage any kind of peace prospects.
Peace unless the chances of peace are based on annexing the West Bank.
Well,
doing this now as opposed to, say, toward the middle or end of a peace process. Right. See how this helps clear any more than moving the embassy to Jerusalem did. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem somehow?
Some would say that this recognizes, Shai, some would say that this recognizes the reality of the ground and gives the parameters of realistic expectations for the Palestinians in which to work. And let's bring Matt Brodsky into this conversation. Matt, what's your take on this announcement by Secretary Pompeo today?
Well, I think it basically reverses what the Obama administration had done when he kicked Israel in his final weeks before leaving office and passed a resolution, shepherded and passed, and worked with the international community at the UN Security Council to basically declare that every Israeli settlement, that the Western Wall in Jerusalem, that would be all considered illegal, which was the biggest upending of American policy toward Israel up until that point. So this, again, is going to simply make clear that at the end of negotiations, they can come up with an agreement, but the U.S. is no longer going to be involved in zoning disputes in local Israeli land area. That's the way the administration sees it. And just like the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, the Trump administration says that this does not prejudge the outcome of any negotiations either. I think we would do well to recall that.
All right, Matt, Shai, stick around. A lot more to get into, including the other big story of the day, and that's the political deadline facing the country. We have the Blue and White Party leader now having less than 2 days to form a government, or Israel is likely headed for yet another round of elections. Mike Pompeo announcing today that the Trump administration is reversing an Obama administration policy that labeled Israeli settlements as being in violation of international law. Pompeo added that strong opposition to Israeli settlements has not worked to bring about peace.
Calling the establishment of civilian settlements inconsistent with international law hasn't worked. It hasn't advanced the cause of peace. The hard truth is, there will never be a judicial resolution to the conflict, and arguments about who is right and wrong as a matter of international law will not bring peace.
Now, all of this happening just as some very crucial deadlines in Israel's political impasse are about to kick in. I-24's diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim has more on what to expect during the next 48 hours.
Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu has pulled one rabbit after another out of his hat over the course of his career. Now, can his novice opponent do the same? Former IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, the leader of the Blue and White Party, has only until the stroke of midnight on Wednesday night to form a government. After then, his mandate runs out, and there's been no progress in forming a unity government with Netanyahu's Likud party. Netanyahu won't break away his faction from his 55-member right-wing and religious bloc, and Gantz won't agree to let Netanyahu serve first as prime minister in a rotation agreement, especially as corruption indictments are due to be handed down against Netanyahu any day now. Just this past weekend, Netanyahu and his allies railed against the possibility that Gantz may turn left to his center-left 44-member bloc and form a minority government with outside support from at least part of the 13-member Joint Arab List. Joint List legislators routinely call for the end of a Jewish state in the land of Israel and not merely for increased opportunities and funding for Israel's large Arab population. But it's the only other option Gantz has right now, and he's billing a minority government more as a transitional government. Yes, it's all about messaging, telling anyone and everyone that if Netanyahu won't agree to serve second or just step aside, that a temporary government without him is the only way to get the Israeli psyche to understand that there can be life without Netanyahu at the top, laying the groundwork for a future Netanyahu-less coalition. Potential kingmaker Avigdor Lieberman of the right-wing secular Yisrael Beitenu party says he cannot support Netanyahu's bloc due to the heavy religious nature and cannot support Gantz unless he agrees to let Netanyahu serve first and step away if needed to handle his legal troubles. Lieberman signaled Gantz is more open to compromise, but cannot get harder-lying factions of his own party to agree to go along. Come Thursday morning, any member of parliament will have 3 weeks to get a majority, 61 members, to rally behind him or her in a last-ditch effort to form a government, or else we are headed to a third straight election, unless, of course, Gantz still has 2 nights to work some magic. Maybe he learned something from his old boss, Netanyahu.
All right, our thanks to Mike Wagenheim. Let's bring back our panel, Matt Brodsky and Shai Franklin. Matt, I want to ask you about the timing of this declaration by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo regarding Israeli settlements not being inherently illegal. Does it serve to boost Netanyahu in any way? And was that perhaps by design?
Yeah, I don't think it's at all designed to boost Netanyahu. I think the fact is, when we look back at the Obama resolution from previous in 2016 at the end, Netanyahu was out and very vocal about saying that this was a horrible resolution, and the people he was serving with were saying that they have proof that the Obama administration was in fact behind the whole resolution at the point when the Obama administration was frankly just lying to the American people about the fact, and frankly lying to Israelis about the fact that they were the ones behind this. Right now, this isn't anything that Trump wants to do to boost Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu can spin it like any other party in Israel is going to spin it.
He probably is spinning it as part of his very special relationship with the Trump administration. It could, in effect, land up boosting Netanyahu. But Shai, let's focus on Gantz because he's the man of the moment and he's running out of time to form that coalition by the deadline. What do you expect?
I really don't know what to expect. It's possible that they've been negotiating with Lieberman, and it's possible that Gantz will come around to an understanding with Lieberman. It's possible that we'll go with the joint list. Netanyahu has been really playing that up as the end of the Jewish state, the end of the Jewish people. If Gantz does that, the ultimate treason and travesty. So, and I think today's announcement does help Netanyahu, and not necessarily. First of all, if there are new elections, it helps Netanyahu. In terms of the West Bank settlements being recognized by the United States now as not illegal, not inconsistent with international law. But it also helps Netanyahu in terms of the atmosphere in these negotiations that are going on right now. It reminds everybody in the room that he has been getting, he gets credit for what the Trump administration does for Israel, just as he got any blame if the Obama administration wasn't as friendly to him.
All right, Shai, thank you so much. Shai Franklin. Matt, stick around. We want to get your thoughts on this next story because the U.S. State Department didn't just make a key announcement on Israel today. Pompeo also denounced the Iranian regime's violent crackdown on the growing protests inside Iran. And Pompeo also addressed Iran's return to its nuclear weapons program. He announced that the U.S. will now cancel all waivers to economic sanctions against Tehran, meant to stop the development at a once secret site in the city of Fordow.
The right amount of uranium enrichment for the world's largest state sponsor of terror is zero. Iran originally constructed Fordow as a fortified underground bunker to conduct secret uranium enrichment work. And there is no legitimate reason for Iran to resume enrichment at this previously clandestine site.
Now, the protests are taking on a more urgent tone as Iran's supreme leader calling them thugs over the weekend. That gave the nation's police and troops the green light to violently attack the demonstrators. I-24's Adi Koplovitz reports.
Another day of riots in Iran. Protesters in over 100 cities setting banks and police stations on fire, calling for the fall of the Islamic Republic. Videos leaked to social networks show police forces are dispersing demonstrators, using tear gas and live ammunition too. In these confrontations between demonstrators and security forces, casualties are inevitable. Exact numbers are still vague. The Iranian government has blocked internet access across the country since Saturday. For protesters, it's an extreme step taken to prevent organizers from coordinating further action.
The regime completely shuts down the internet, so it's dark inside. We don't know what's going on. We just hear news from like small streams of information from here and there. But the regime has turned off the lights inside just like they did in 1988, and they're just killing people right now.
On Sunday, the United States State Department condemned the suppression of protests. While public support is important to some of the protesters, the regime is exploiting it to portray them as traitors, cooperating with Iran's biggest enemy. With protests becoming more aggressive, it's only a matter of time before the regime's Revolutionary Guard intervenes, the security force known for its brutal tactics. And this is a major threat to those out in the streets.
What we have seen from Khamenei over the past 3 decades is he never backs down from a decision. He will back down in front of international forces, but never domestically in front of the people.
The chances of the protesters actually stopping the increase of gas prices seems almost impossible. But even if that goal is not achieved, they have managed to undermine public support for the Islamic regime currently in power.
All right, that was Adi Koplovitz reporting. Let's talk more about these Iranian protests and nuclear stories with Behnam Taleblu. Behnam is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Matt Brodsky also still with us. All right, Behnam, let's start with you. We have Iran and now also implementing a internet blackout. These protesters seem to be gaining steam. Do you think that these protests could amount to something different than previous ones?
Michelle, Matt, good to be with you. It depends what you mean by that. In terms of toppling the regime, right now, as you know, the regime has the monopoly on force, a monopoly on violence, a monopoly on coercion. But day in, day out, these protesters, which are moving from day 4 into day 5 now, are transgressing red lines, breaking taboos, signaling discontent with the regime, and using every single opportunity to tell the international community that there is a vast chasm between the Iranian state and the Iranian society. What is most different about these protests is that they are while Iran is under the max pressure campaign. And unlike those who were against this campaign and who said that foreign pressure would have Iranians rally around the flag, we now have 1 year of data. Under the toughest of sanctions, Iranians still realize that their biggest impediment to a better life is Khamenei and the ruling elite in Iran.
All right, Matt, the Obama administration was criticized for not supporting the Green Movement shoots of a protest movement then. Should the Trump administration be more actively supporting these protesters, and how?
I think there's more that the Trump administration could do for the protesters. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's position is essentially that they're not going to outright call for regime change. And we're at a moment right now where it's not just in Iran that the regime is suffering. It's throughout the region. Its image is taking a giant battering. So the administration could be helping further with getting internet and communication services back, because it's, as Pompeo pointed out, I believe he pointed out, the regime itself is currently using Twitter and social media to get its message out while blocking this for all of the people. There's a lot of metrics to look for. Also, the fact that the protest movement is continuing like it is right now, I think we're also starting to see some fraying of the Revolutionary Guards. It's not like a monolith that is completely comfortable in the situation of trying to, say, go after and attack all the protesters.
And I guess that's the strategy there. I guess that's part of the strategy, divide and conquer, cause some chaos too inside of the regime. Look, Behnam, as Matt says, the president and Secretary of State Pompeo have said that their goal is not regime change, but to get Tehran to the negotiating table. Do you buy that? Is regime change really not the goal here?
I actually do buy it. If you look at the Trump administration strategy, it's entirely designed to pressure Iran to come to the table. In fact, they bend over backwards, it seems like, trying to say that the policy is not regime change. I think, given what's going on the street in Tehran, Washington should attempt to scale back its zealous attempts not to say the policy is regime change, simply for the sake of not disheartening Iranian protesters. You know, whenever you have protests on the street in Iran, Washington, whether Democratic or Republican administrations, seems to be caught flat-footed. And I think it's imperative now that Washington come up with a bipartisan Iran protest policy playbook, things that, you know, liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans can all agree on. And that could be things like Matt just said, making sure there is access to the internet, communications technology, VPNs, workarounds to the Iranian government's attempts to suffocate freedom of speech and freedom of expression through the information technology, as well as sanctions against those who actually punish Iranians. So looking at videos, figuring out, is it the law enforcement forces or is it Basij cracking down in this city or in this town, and having a very nuanced designation, name and shame campaign. This village, this Basij official, this town, this law enforcement official, and being willing to scale and stratify that over time.
Matt, very quickly, is there anyone leading these protests that can actually organize this into a meaningful resistance?
I mean, there's lots of groups that would like to vie for the leadership of it, but the biggest question that always remains in Washington is what's the viable alternative, and there's clearly a search for that, and a lot of people that would like to take that reign of power, so to speak.
All right. Thank you so much for your analysis and perspective. Behnam, Taleblu, Matt Brodsky. Appreciate it as always. Well, there's turmoil in the Pacific as the